Recently, Raid Shadow Legends released content showing a gothic version of Alice from Alice in Wonderland. There were so many comments wishing that this game was a full-length game or a full-length production. But what if I told you that did exist? American McGee's Alice series takes a grim look at the world of Lewis Carroll's Alice Adventures in Wonderland through the looking glass and what Alice found there, and Disney's Alice in Wonderland. Themes of madness, escapism, justice, grief, and healing are central to the series, and offers a realistic perspective to the wondrous journey of Alice Little. I just want to give you a heads up, we will be talking about some really harsh topics throughout this video, and there will be absolute spoilers for American McGee's Alice and Alice Madness Returns. With that being said, let's deep dive into American McGee's Alice series. In American McGee's Alice, Alice Little often dreams of Wonderland. One night, she is awoken from her slumber by a fire that ultimately destroys her home and kills the rest of her family. Due to the severity of her burns and psychological trauma, she is transported to the Routledge Asylum. One night, Alice hears her toy rabbit from childhood call out to her for help, and she goes toward him and somehow ends up in Wonderland. But this Wonderland is wonky, it's disfigured, and it's more grim from what she remembers from her dreams. This is because of her psychological trauma. On her journey, she meets the Cheshire Cat, the White Rabbit, Hatter, Queen of Hearts, and all the other characters we remember from the original tale. Alice learns that the reason why the villages of Wonderland are so ghastly and dilapidated is because of the Queen of Hearts and her reign of terror. The Queen of Hearts had fused with the Red Queen and became especially violent and cruel towards the kingdom. Alice vows to do something to help everyone out, ultimately follows the White Rabbit to the Queen of Hearts castle. Alice fights through many battles and eventually reaches the Queen of Hearts. But before their showdown, the Cheshire Cat attempts to warn Alice about the Queen of Hearts, but is struck down. As he's inching toward death, the Cheshire Cat at least gets to tell Alice that you two are part of the same. Alice fights the Red Queen, who reveals herself to be a simple puppet of the Queen of Hearts. Once Alice defeats the Red Queen, she reveals her true monstrous form and warns Alice that destroying the Queen of Hearts will also destroy Alice. But sticking to her vow to save Wonderland, Alice kills the Queen of Hearts, and Wonderland returns to the once peaceful and vibrant place that it was. Now back in the world of reality, it's actually revealed that Alice has been in a catatonic state in the Routledge Asylum for years. But now that she's awake and seemingly healed, Alice leaves the asylum. Alice Madness Returns begins in a dull, gray, melancholy London-based orphanage where a now 19-year-old Alice Little resides. While she is no longer committed to the asylum, Alice is under the care of pediatric psychologist Dr. Angus Bumpy, whose methodology of care and dealing with the trauma is to use hypnosis to suppress memories. For Alice, the trauma of the fire, the death of her family, and subsequent years in a coma is just worth forgetting. But she is still haunted by hallucinations of Wonderland. While Alice believes she's fine, she ultimately ends up getting stuck in her hallucinations and is transported back to Wonderland. But something once again is very wrong. This Wonderland has a ghastly and dark vibe, and it looks like it's being corrupted by a dark force spearheaded by an infernal train. Alice is somewhat aware that the state of Wonderland is connected to her mind and is a direct reflection of her mental state. Throughout the game, Alice jumps between reality and the corrupted Wonderland that is progressively getting worse, seeking the answers behind the fire that killed her family and confronting her grief head on. Alice once again meets the residents of Wonderland and learns that the Queen of Hearts is certainly not dead and that she must defeat her once and for all. But in addition to defeating her, must face the source that is corrupting Wonderland. The closer that Alice gets to the source, the more we learn about her past unclouded from her trauma, grief, and suppressed memories. From the first game, we know that the Queen of Hearts is connected to Alice. While it is believed that we solved the issues in Wonderland in American McGee's Alice, something in Alice's life triggered its resurgence and progressive disintegration of her mind. In her fights through Wonderland, interacting with familiar characters such as the Cheshire Cat, Hatter, and more, we get clues to who is actually at the center of this corruption. And eventually, Alice reaches the Queen of Hearts. At first, we see that the Queen of Hearts actually resembles Alice's older sister, Lizzie. But we know that Lizzie died in the house fire, so something's not right there. But the further we go, we see that the Queen of Hearts is actually a younger version of Alice, who uses Lizzie's face as an avatar to trigger Alice to remember the events of the night of the fire. The Queen of Hearts reveals to Alice that she actually lost her rule over Wonderland due to the degeneration of Alice's mind. The Queen of Hearts challenged Alice to really think and simply ask who would benefit from her insanity, and pushed her on the path that would lead her to the right answer. Alice thought to back when her delusions of Wonderland began and when she started getting trapped in them. And it had actually began when she started seeing Dr. Bumby and having her memories of the fire suppressed. You see, Dr. Angus Bumby is not a stand-up guy. During his undergraduate studies at Oxford University, he was tutored by Arthur Little, Lizzie and Alice's father. Often, Little would host tutoring sessions at his home, and that's where Bumby met Lizzie. Lizzie, who's very much a child, was not fond of any of the undergraduates, but particularly found Bumby very creepy. Bumby would make inappropriate advances toward Lizzie, which were vehemently rejected. And Lizzie actually asked her father to stop inviting Bumby over and started to actively avoid him. Bumby did not like this and resorted to stalking Lizzie. He was stalking a child. Bumby's obsession with Lizzie escalated. November the 5th, 1863, which November the 5th is Guy Fawkes Day in England, broke into the little home, which was witnessed by Alice. Bumby made his way through the little house, found Lizzie, assaulted, and murdered her. To cover up his crimes, he set the house ablaze while taking the key to Lizzie's room as a trophy. Later, he would use that key as a pendant to hypnotize his patients, including Alice. Little Alice survived the fire by jumping out of the second floor window into a pile of white snow. But before passing out, she saw Bumby at the edge of the forest before he disappeared into the shadows. The trauma from all of this is what led her to be committed to the Routledge Asylum for a decade. Now, Alice realizes this in Wonderland, so now she snaps back to the real world, where Alice confronts Bumby. Alice snatches Lizzie's key. Empowered with the clarity of mind, she pushes Bumby in front of a train, avenging her family and putting an end to his tyranny. Throughout the game, you may find yourself asking, is Alice actually mad? And by the end, your answer may be complicated. What I absolutely enjoy about this game is that it takes a psychological view of the absolute absurdity of Alice in Wonderland. While Lewis Carroll's Alice's Adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and What Alice Found There novels are great examples of the literary nonsense genre, the realm of Wonderland does have a sort of order. Only to the real world is that order complete nonsense. What's great about American McGee's Alice and Alice Madness Returns is that it brilliantly blends the nonsensical world of Wonderland with Alice's reality. From an observer's point of view, it makes complete sense in the world of reality that if somebody was living with delusions of following a talking white rabbit with a pocket watch and a waistcoat down a hole in a tree and was suddenly transported into another dimension, we would have some follow-up questions. However, linking the source of hallucinations to Alice's trauma, grief, and her refusal to confront it normalizes what she was experiencing. It challenges the "is Alice just mad" theory and it makes it apparent that she is coping with her trauma and loss as best as a child could. And it makes it apparent that she is coping with her trauma and loss as best as a child, now teen, moving into adulthood with unresolved trauma can. Sometimes the safest place for many children to feel is in their imagination, where seemingly the harshness of the real world can't reach them. Now, between the two games, there are some plot holes and there are many rush points within the game. I am not denying that. And sometimes it does put a little bit of a downer on the experience when you're analyzing it at a micro level versus a macro level, because there are so many symbols and metaphors that could be taken just a few steps further that would make this masterpiece level storytelling. I will say, as somebody who did get to experience American McGee's Alice before it became very much hard to find and play, the sequel, Alice Madness Returns, backed off of the horror elements that were very present in the first game. I feel like that choice really upped the space to dive more into the lore and storytelling of Alice Madness Returns. I want to talk about some of my favorite symbols and allegories. Let's start with the symbols on Alice's dress. The symbols on Alice's dress are reflective of her journey, inner turmoil, and overcoming that turmoil. They are symbols for Discordia and Jupiter. Now, Discordia's Greek equivalent is Eris, the Greek goddess of strife and discord, hence where the name Discordia comes from. She is known as the battle goddess and is the sister of Ares, that Ares god of war and courage. She also represents the female warrior driven by a sole purpose in an all or nothing fight for one's existence and beliefs. Eris, or Discordia, is also a sign that is associated with one's rebellious state. Jupiter is the planet of luck, fortune, success, and generosity. Jupiter's Greek equivalent is none other than Zeus himself, the king of gods who wields a thunderbolt. To put it directly, Jupiter is power. These symbols being on Alice's dress represents her inner turmoil, her subconscious rebellious spirit, and her inner power to overcome, which is pretty much the arc of Alice's journey. There is obvious inner turmoil within Alice due to the traumatic events of her past. However, her having power and influence over Wonderland, and to some extent her mind, and I only say to some some extent because Dr. Bumby was obviously influencing her mind. But Alice always had the subconscious power to fight back against that influence. But also with that inner turmoil and with her inner strength, her embracing her fighting spirit, set on her convictions of avenging her family, that is genius level allegory, and I love it. The next symbol I want to talk about is Wonderland. Wonderland is definitely an allegory for escapism, protection, and in the Alice series was a direct reflection of Alice's trauma and disintegration of her mind. As a child, Wonderland was a vibrant, happy place for Alice. However, after the fire, Wonderland became twisted and ghastly and violent. It had returned to the happy place temporarily. After Alice began getting her memory suppressed by Bumby, Wonderland returned to its twisted state and was significantly worse than before. Alice's mind, while being tampered with by Bumby, her subconscious still fought. Her subconscious still fought back in the ways that it could through the environment, the inhabitants of Wonderland, and scattered suppressed memories. Wonderland was and is Alice's safe place. I always considered Wonderland to be a part of Alice's subconscious instinct to keep her safe, not only from her trauma, but also to protect her from the real world. It's like her gut feeling, but it manifests into like this big magical world. But in that big magical world, we had the Infernal Train. The Infernal Train represents defense mechanisms. The train was a place that held all of Alice's fears and began to manifest under Bumby's influence on her mind. Bumby weaponized Alice's survivor's guilt, fear, and unhappiness to make her dependent on him. The train was built by some of the inhabitants of Wonderland and was responsible for the damage that was not only unleashed upon Wonderland itself, but also happened to damage Alice's memory. It's like a physical yet imaginative manifestation of Bumby's hypnotism that was there solely to do damage. Its horrific appearance is a direct reflection of Alice's fears. Once an enemy was defeated, Alice could actually speak to them aboard the train and gain clues as to who is the true mastermind behind Wonderland's destruction. Through these therapy sessions, Bumby had installed mental blocks in Alice's mind to coerce her into eventually being dependent on him. But Alice's powerful subconscious, rebellious spirit, and imagination fought back, knowing that it was being manipulated away from the truth. The best part, I think, with the allegory with the Infernal Train is that the damage that it did to Wonderland is permanent. So the damage that was done to Alice's mind will unfortunately stay with her forever. However, she is more than her trauma and she is more than her past. And while she will heal, the scar is there forever, reminding her of what she overcome and reminding her of her strength. You know, it's really sad we're never gonna know how the Alice series ultimately ends because American McGee is now retired and the indie studio who developed both games, Spicy Horse, has been closed since 2016. Alice Otherlands was a Kickstarter funded project that was meant to complete the Alice trilogy, but that ultimately didn't pan out. And wouldn't you believe it, in 2023, EA rejected a pitch for a different sequel, which was going to be called Alice Asylum, because they hate fun. I really think EA still has something against single player games, but whatever. If it wasn't apparent from the themes of this game centering on childhood trauma, grief, and loss, there are some pretty heavy topics in the Alice series. Video games as a medium have the ability to create stories that can approach themes such as childhood trauma, grief, loss, healing, and triumph, and actually open avenues to learn, reflect, and empathize with them. Even if that's through the metaphor of battling giant corrupted monsters with an enormous pepper shaker head. Everyone eventually experiences loss and grief at some point in their life. It is a very human experience that we all have or all will have in common. But we also have the ability within us to face that and grow beyond our grief and grow beyond our traumas and heal and work toward a better and more hopeful future. Hi, editing me here. I wanted to add on a few points about American McGee's Alice Asylum. So Alice Asylum has a whole design Bible that's available on Patreon. So there is obviously still a lot of support and a huge campaign behind this game. So we have a general idea of how the series is going to end, but like we don't have the game. We don't have the thing. That's what EA rejected. There's so much support behind American McGee's Alice. And I feel like American McGee is like semi-retired because back in 2022, there was talks of actually picking up American McGee's Alice series for a TV show. Now, no one has picked up the show yet, but you know, maybe it can get picked up soon. I feel like as long as there's like a driving campaign behind the game, not only on Patreon, but also like content creators talking about the game, or, you know, things like Raid Shadow Legends showing like how cool a gothic version of Alice is, and that we have a series that already does that. So, you know, maybe we should, you know, support it. Maybe we should get a game in the works, get it going. because the people deserve it. And American McGee is a freaking genius. Also, I saw this over on TikTok, but there is a creator who is attempting to make the Alice Asylum game. They're a solo developer, but they're using the design Bible to actually make it into a reality. But for the life of me, I can't find them because I forgot to save them before the TikTok ban, and now all of my stuff is messed up. So I'm trying to like get my TikTok folders back where they need to be. But yeah, that's what my editing brain had to add. I forgot to mention that in the original script. So hi. Now I know giant themes like that weren't captured in Raid Shadow Legends. The games like Alice Madness really remind me of why I fell in love with video games, why I love to read books. I love the storytelling. I love being able to connect with really deep and rich topics through a medium that I love. And listen, not all video games out there are dark and deal with loss and grief and things like that. But I think with resources being at an all-time low, especially going into 2025, and looking for empathy or something that can maybe empathize with an experience that you're going through, I love that video games are a lane of storytelling that can make that accessible, where maybe you can find yourself or learn something from it and take that with you forever. Now, I know that that was some heavy stuff. So why not go over to my cozy channel and look at the suggestions I have for people who are newer to gaming, particularly cozy games. Until next time, bye.